Alright, welcome back. Last time, we just finished the League Wars. And now we're working on getting the Mingan insurgency turning into the, well, whatever the country is called after that. I think the national government ends up being the end result. So, that means we need to get started on the first Repatriated Congress, which will take a while, but we've got time. Right, this begins with this event, so let me just walk through it. Having been ousted from the politics of China for more than a decade now, the KMT's recent victory over its enemies in the League War has seen Sun Yat-sen's ideas for a national revolution revived once more. Once the home of the Ming emperors, the Provisional Presidential Palace, which has been used as the seat of power for Sun Quanfang's autocratic rule over the 8 provinces, has now been renovated into the headquarters of the National Revolutionary Government. I believe that's what's going to end up being the name once the Repatriated Congress is completed. News of the KMT's first Repatriated Congress is beginning to spread across China, rallying like-minded revolutionaries in a common goal to fulfill the dream of the Northern Expedition and create a modern and just Republic of China. In addition, a delegation from the Third Internationale will also be in attendance at the Congress. Having long pledged their support to the KMT since the party's initial reorganization in 1924, the Central Committee has long played exile in Paris and owes its remarkable success to the backing of the 2 major syndicalist nations of Europe. The cordial entourage includes the French syndicalist advisors André Malraux and Jean Fontenoy, the British advisor David Ramsay, the Indian socialist M.N. Roy, the Norwegian syndicalist Ingvald Berntin Asse, and various volunteer advisors from primarily the French and British militaries who have also pledged their services to develop the National Revolutionary Army. Nonetheless, these foreign observers could certainly see that notable factions, or cliques, were beginning to form within the Congress ranks. Those who fought for Song Qingling's populist government, and those that returned home from the syndicalist New Order. Chairman Wang Jingwei stood behind a grandiose portrait of Sun Yat-sen flanked by the party's flag and the NRA's flag as he began his speech to inaugurate the Congress. Perhaps to acknowledge the absence of the party's right wing, he started with a passionate appeal that, from a revolutionary anti-imperialist standpoint, the true revolutionaries were to come from the Kuomintang's left. And thus, the first Repatriated Congress began in earnest. The ecstatic revolutionary mood of Nanjing reminded many of the same patriotic fervor that had captured Guangzhou in 1924. Let's get started right away. And things start over here. Hawaii's ambivalence. Across the sea in Honolulu sits perhaps the most reluctant faction still loyal to Wang's Central Committee. Led by Sun Fo, this faction of KMT liberals remains on the fence, refusing to directly participate in the present revolt and just barely recognizing Wang's leadership. Relations between the mainline leftist factions and the so-called Hawaii clique have long since cooled as the RCA's revolutionary critic trades barbs with Hawaii's Reconstruction Review in scathing editorials. Despite this mutual animosity, Wang Jingwei has taken the initiative to try and bridge the divide. Sun's prestigious name aside, Hawaii's control over the Overseas Chinese Committee gives them extensive contacts with the Chinese diaspora in Southeast Asia. Furthermore, their liberal, moderate face gives them ready access to wealthy, nationalistic businessmen and intellectuals in China's coastal cities. One must ask, however, how much ground is worth giving to extend a knowledge bench without compromising our revolutionary ideals. I'll just take what I can get. I'm not going to boost social liberal popularity. unnecessarily. Nanjing has been liberated. Gone are the warlords Sun Chafeng and Kui Ziyong. Ziyuan? The tyrants who stole from the people and sold the city to imperialists. At long last, the white sun flies over the city, the dream of the northern expedition nearly a decade ago. In a speech today, following the city's capture, a triumphant ceremony honored the late party founder and all the revolutionary martyrs that have fallen over the years. More practically, it is clear that the KMT intends to turn Nanjing into the provisional capital for the duration of the National Revolution. Already, the former Governor General's palace, and the same building where Dr. Sun was sworn in as provisional president in 1911, has been converted into a provisional presidential palace. A provisional executive yuan is being established as well, subordinate to the Central Executive Committee, with Wang Junwei as the president of the national government. Liao Zongkai has been appointed premier of the executive yuan, a new position to serve as head of the KMT government. It appears that the KMT have begun their first forays into ruling an organized state. The Congress's first tenet was to address the KMT's utmost duty to uplift the oppressed workers and peasants of China. In the spirit of the first reorganization, the KMT was to awaken the masses and unite together the peasants, workers, merchants, and students in order to defeat their shared enemies, the imperialists and warlords. Within conservative elements, especially the elders of the party, the KMT should represent the whole people during the National Revolution. The elder Wu Zihui even arguing that good landlords and merchants could join the revolution alongside the masses. Talking to the stand after Wang's speech, RCA members Cheng Gangbo and Shi Kuntong took to the floor to argue that class, however, was the most important question in the revolution, and that class struggle was a necessary evolution of the Chinese Revolution. Citing the efforts of Song Qingling's peasants in the Minggan insurgency and the strikes of 1932, Shi and Qian blasted Wu by citing a former saying from Sun in which the party's founder said, "The National Revolution should accomplish socialism." While a definitive class base was drawn by both Sung's populist and Wang's growing RCA faction, in that the KMT is to indeed henceforth be a party of workers and peasants, foreign observers have certainly noticed factional tensions rising beneath the facade of party unity. The RCA, after all, believe that a revolutionary cadre must lead the masses, a move that many in Song Qingling's Provisional Action Committee find offense at, as they do not see a revolution of the masses led by a pretentious elite. But the KMT is a party of workers and peasants. Right. I'm not going to need military equipment for a while. Yeah. So I can focus on long-term technologies. The leftist-dominated Central Executive Committee of the KMT's reputation as the legitimate and heir of the Chinese Nationalist Party that had collapsed in the first Northern Expedition has nonetheless attracted the interest of various centrists and liberals. These men, who tend to waver in their alignment with the KMT's right and left wings prior to the expedition's failure, distrust the outwardly socialist development of the party across the last decade. Many of these Republicans chose to flee overseas for the United States, Hawaii, and Southeast Asia, where they made up the Overseas Commission of the Chinese Kuomintang, an extension of KMT interests far away from China itself. Led primarily by Sun Fo, the son of the party's founder, the centrists have been invited to participate in the first Repatriated Congress, and Sun Fo has been graciously offered a seat in the Central Executive Committee. They are also joined by the military officers who served in India during the KMT's exile, Generals Xu Yu and Zhang Feiku, who claim to be apolitical, although they certainly would view the syndicalists as a persistent potential threat. As such, the combination of this India clique and the former OCC has led to the formation of the so-called Reconstruction faction, which was based on Sun Fo's own words to rebuild or reconstruct the KMT without resorting to the radical methods of reorganization. The Reconstruction's faction's influence is tracked by the social liberal popularity in the party wheel. At low levels, they hope serve as a moderating influence that produces radicalism. But at higher levels, they will be seen as subversive and increase radicalism. Keep watch of the party's perception of its liberal ring. Having Sun Fo as an advisor will help keep perception positive. Looks like the government lost Jingzi. That makes them weaker. And the Spanish Civil War has begun. Tensions within the League of Chinese Syndicalists. The proclamation of a new revolutionary socialist Chinese government has led to a growing sense of excitement and patriotism within the Chinese left wing. The conglomerate of socialist thinkers, intellectuals, and writers who are not party members of the KMT have formed the fragile coalition of the League of Chinese Syndicalists, the largest faction of which is the Chinese Syndicalist Party. Tensions have nonetheless begun to emerge between the LCS. Ideologically, not all socialists in the LCS adhere to the belief that China is already in a capitalist society. A young generation of radical socialists called the radical faction of the LCS has declared that Chinese society is already in a capitalistic mode of production, and that both peasants and workers are constrained in a system of capitalism, a system that must be destroyed by the revolution. Older conservative members of the LCS, such as Dong Biwu and Ling Boku, the orthodox faction, have instead voiced for cooperation with the Chinese KMT, and many of them adhere to the belief that China is still a semi-feudal nation. Separate from the CSP's radical and orthodox wings is the World Society, a generation of old and idealistic anarchists who believe in the Proudhonist ideas of class reconciliation and universal harmony, represented by party elders such as Li Xinzeng, Wu Zihui, Zhang Benqi, and Cai Yuanpai. They absolutely abhor and fear the class conflict stoked by radical members of the RCA or those within the LCS. The League of Chinese Syndicalists is an unwieldy coalition, and its influence depends on which faction dominates it. In order of increasing starting influence, the radicals are materialist socialist hardliners who align with the RCA and increase radicalism. The World Society is an old guard, utopian influence that favors the PAC. Lastly, the Orthodox faction is a wild card, favoring a side as needed while reducing radicalism overall. Ethnic relations within China have not always been peaceful, but it was the great Dr. Sun Yat-sen who theorized that the notion of Minzu from the three principles of the people was necessary to prevent the nation from falling into disorder and chaos. Interestingly enough, his earlier opinions seemed to encourage the notion of a Dan-Han ethnicity. But as evident from his declaration of the 1924 reorganization of the KMT, some proclaimed that the KMT's anti-imperialist mission also included securing self-determination for all domestic Minzu. But the notion of Minzu itself is disputed, as Sun considers the great races of Qing China, aside from the Han majority, the Tibetans, Mongols, Manchus, and Hui, as mere relics of an ancient social structure. Instead, the late premier's stance was that the Minzu of China were all subordinate to the ethnically dominant Hanzu. It was, therefore, the more culturally and sophisticated Hanzu's destiny to lead the Minzu into the evolutionary formation of a single Han Zhongao Minzu. In the National Revolution, all notions of self-determination were to be suspended until the period of tutelage is past, as the country's Minzu are merely inept to rule themselves. The Repatriated Congress, and particularly Wang Jingwei's faction, is mostly in favor of following Sun's principles. Nonetheless, the PAC has voiced openly that they would be more than happy to promise a degree of self-autonomy for the minorities, provided that they support the KMT, of course. While Mongolian and Tibetan Affairs Commission has been formed, the official doctrine of the said department is to train these people to adopt the revolutionary spirit of the superior Hanzu KMT. But until the warlords and imperialists have been comprehensively defeated, the question of ethnic minorities shall remain indisputably answered by only the KMT. That's a question that needs to be answered later. I need to start working on my industry. Upgrades. Yeah. Cut the dissertations column. And the Congress is closed. After 7 weeks of long deliberation, the Second Repatriated Congress, the KMT, has formally adjourned. Although much has been decided upon, there were plenty left unresolved, and subtle fractures have begun to form between Wang's loyalists and his divided opposition. In the meantime, as delegates and representatives prepare to head on home, they have decided to entrust the third and latest Central Executive Committee to manage party affairs. Headed by Chairman Wang Jingwei and Vice Chairman Liao Zongkai, the two are joined by 22 others. I am not reading all those names. Given disciplinary powers and with say over financial affairs is the Central Supervisory Committee, made up of KMT stalwarts Cai Wanpai, Li Xinzeng, Wu Zihui, Xu Qian, and Zhang Renji. Both committees also have extensive and carefully negotiated alternative member rosters. A delicate balance of power has been erected, with Wang and his RCA carefully moving to consolidate his government without provoking excessive backlash from those increasingly antagonized by his efforts to assert his authority. Perhaps best encapsulating the emergent power games being played by Wang's decision to appoint Sun Fo as vice premier of the Executive Yuan, a new prestigious but rather powerless position, to help remove a rival from loyalist Cheng Gangbo's bid to become premier of the Legislative Yuan. Although the full cabinet is yet to be named, Song Qingling and her allies are said to be already grumbling about a lack of representation, feeling deliberately locked out. However, it is unlikely they can do much to contest the president's appointments. Or can they? The LKMT's balance of power mechanic is fairly straightforward in that it measures the relative influence of the two major factions, the RCA and the PAC. Depending on which side has the advantage after Chinese unification, a scenario will play out that will allow one or the other to consolidate their power. Shifting the balance too far for one side will destabilize the revolution, but be warned. If neither side has a clear advantage, a third scenario might emerge. Right, now the question is which way to go. It's important to start setting up the... But I also would like to start getting a proper quantity of... Wow. How should I put this? Yeah, army experience. I'm gonna need that. And badly. But a strong economy is really important. Well, that also increases compliance gain, which means it's faster for me to course up. Sort of the provisional legislative yuan. The China Revival Society. As KMT representatives assembled and politicked in Nanjing, plenty left outside of the negotiating table found time to gather on their own. Away from the public spotlight, a different set of ideas and ideals swirled. Many disaffected Whampoa alumni, stewing in exile far from home across the last decade, had gathered together within the Academy's tightly woven networks. The more ideological and radical of this bunch turned to He Zonghan and Deng Wenyi, mid-level staff officers who promoted a nationalistic, totalistic, and anti-establishment line. Having returned, they proudly began calling their secret fraternity the Revolutionary Army Comrades Association. A secret circle within a larger secret circle, they nervously presented their ideas before Hu Zongnan, the director of Whampoa's training department, and other sympathetic commanders in a backroom meeting. Although short by stature, Hu is one of the eldest of Whampoa's first graduating class, aged 28 in 1924, and a favorite of the former headmaster, who preferred Zhejiang natives. Elements he exploited to assert an air of authority over many of his peers and students. To the delight of attendees, Hu gave his approval for the RACA's agenda before his fellow Young Guard officers, and formally accepted his role as their Ling Cui. In his speech, the general swore to ensure the Chinese Revolution will never again be the victim of foreign imperialists or petty infighting. Wielding the RACA, the League of Ten, and other radical officers together into one fighting movement, the China Revival Society is born. Radicalism within the party will increase by a medium amount. Radicalism within the KMT will rise and fall depending on event choices. This is primarily to the benefit of the totalist CRS, and should radicalism be greater than the strength of the winner's balance of power, a grim ending scenario for China will activate upon unification. And now we finally start to get the political stuff, the outer factions of the revolution. I probably should burn my political points on something anyway, so... And the Army Experience game will overpower the Military Affairs Commission so I can start working towards other things. Right. Although the KMT, in a vanguardist fashion, maintains that the party takes precedence over the state for the duration of the political tutelage, the conquest of Nanjing means that the party is forced to contend with the realities of governance. To set the groundwork for Dr. Sun's vision, a provisional legislative yuan has been established. Still subordinate in status to the KMT National Congress and the Central Executive Committee, the exact relationship between this government parliamentary body and party organs is still in flux. Despite their junior status, this unicameral legislature is not totally powerless, meeting regularly, unlike the party congress, and appealing to the intellectuals. Naturally, of course, RCA members hold a thin majority of seats, albeit divided between radicals and moderates. Other KMT seats have been given to the PAC and RF, as well as a few Old Guard members. Considerably fewer have been given to the United Front, the largest being the CSP, joined by a few allied independents, like the Dangwai. The premier of the Legislative Yuan is Cheng Gangbo, the de facto leader of the RCA. Thanks to some careful horse trading, the RF has brokered key deals to secure for themselves other high positions in the Yuan, yielding any claim to the premiership, most notably securing longtime Sunfo loyalist Wang Kunlong as vice premier and Liang Hangkao as secretary general. Outflanked by the CIV RCA, the PAC's caucus led by Zhang Bozhun and Peng Zixian have scrambled to rally in an unofficial opposition bloc to prevent total RCA dominance. To do so would require aligning the CSP and chipping off some RCA moderates, but also securing a deal of their own with the RF and the Old Guard. After a series of secretive midnight meetings, an accord is struck. Okay, 2 events at once. That's great, that's great. I think this one occurred because the World Society has become dominant. In 1906, 2 years after the foundation of the Tongmenghui, and long before there was a syndicalist revolution, the new World Society, Ciji Shi, was founded by 4 friends Zhang Renji, Li Shizeng, Wu Zihui, and Cai Yuanpai. Cai Yuanpai? Cai Yuanpai. In Paris. They believed that a new world was coming, one of liberation and freedom for every man, one not only political but also social. Young, intellectual, and anarchist at the time, they mentored any young future socialists in the KMT through their various revolutionary efforts, including newspapers, the diligent work-frugal study movement, and countless writings. Unfortunately, despite being validated by the European revolutions, the syndicalist movement had left them behind in forming the Chinese Syndicalist Party. Forced into a secondary role in the LCS, much to their chagrin, their vocal defense of the political tutelage made them unpopular among the libertarian socialist circles. Li Shizeng, for example, has been quoted as saying, "China's fourth order revolution is a revolution for the entire populace, adapted to the complex demands of the situation." Still, their powerful connections within the dominant KMT, they effectively control the Central Supervisory Board, has given them a critical advantage in syndicalist politics and vaulted them once more into the spotlight. Although the LCS has since collapsed under the weight of infighting, the World Society commands the respect of most syndicalists in China. Proponents of certain utopian interpretation of Proudhonist class reconciliation and universal harmony, they condemn what they see as needless stoking of caste conflict while creating a syndicalist nation. They have begun to stand harshly against Wang Jingwei and the RCA's authoritarian leadership, throwing the lot with the opposition. A Hawaiian fifth column. The KMT's centrist civilian faction has always had a complicated relationship with the left. While the Western Hills Conference was first held in opposition to the reorganization of the late Dr. Sun's alliance with the Internationale, Sun Fo and his clique were initially open to joining with other right-wingers, but ultimately was cowed by the growing influence of Wang Jingwei. Since then, they have mostly acted on the sidelines, serving as a more pliant internal opposition for the RCA that Wang can compromise with to demonstrate his statesmanship while containing the PAC. Still, this does not stop Sun Fo from openly criticizing the government or continuing to champion his relatively liberal views influenced by his education in the US. The PAC have made repeated overtures to the RF, but within the RF's growing internal clout, it appears the old Iron Neck has begun flying a bit too close to the sun and fancying himself as genuinely the primary alternative to Wang's leadership. If this was the case, a harsh reality check is soon to come. Outside of government halls and party editors, the RF finds very little popular support and a growing chorus of opponents who condemn them for selling out the revolution to the bourgeoisie. The only question is whether or not this denouncement will drag down the rest of party leadership with them. We're on to them. The ranks of some. Okay. This is mostly rehashing a lot of things. Maintain the orthodox as steady compromise. I think I'm gonna go for the CSP orthodox. Aim for them. Years ago, just outside of Lingying Temple near Hangzhou, a young man was bathing naked in the banks of the West Lake. A pack of nearby schoolchildren rushed over to take his discarded clothing, only to be stopped by the young teacher who noticed the bather lacked swimwear. The bather thanked the teacher, and both men readily became friends. Both grew up in Zhejiang, were trained to be educators, and above all, shared an ambition to have more in life. That is the fanciful story Dai Chunfeng tells people, for how he was rescued from embarrassment by Hu Zongnong. Although each went their separate ways afterwards, they coincidentally found each other a few years later in Whampoa, as protégés of another Zhejiang native, Chiang Kai-shek. Hu would graduate, Dai never finished his coursework, and both parted after 1927, only to once more find them on one another after the fall of the League. The years have taken the toll on both men, hardly a year apart from one another. Neither feel that they received the respect they deserve in the wake of the League War. Dai in particular fears that despite his dangerous intelligence work before and during the war, no one responsible is willing to associate with him, except it would appear for General Hu Zongnong. As director of the training department, Hu has managed to retroactively secure Dai and a diploma from Whampoa and formal membership in the LKMT. The ambitious general who recruited Dai to his personal staff, giving the man shelter from any reprisals for his work with Kui Ziyuan. The two men have vowed to become blood brothers, hatching backroom schemes in the future. More radicalism. There's been enough construction progress to really justify that just yet. There's barely any. 292 points, yeah. Yeah, this would be smart. Passage of the 1937 Organic Law. With a finalized constitution far in the distance, envisioned only after unification, a working group has been tasked by the National Congress to draft an organic law to supplement the largely defunct 1912 Provisional Constitution. It is modeled after Sun Yat-sen's writings, where he envisioned a government with 5 branches, with a weak president above them. The first 3 are the more traditional executive, legislative, and judicial yuans. They are joined by the examination yuan, dedicated to identifying and keeping records of qualified candidates for civil service positions both nationally and provincially, and in some ways a more modernized imperial service exam. The second is the control yuan, which is given the powers of audit, oversight, and impeachment. Given the circumstances, these 2 smaller yuans are effectively sinecures, meant to respectively shunt sidelined elders, incompetent recipients of patronage, and overly ambitious upstarts to a place they can do minimal damage. Accordingly, there were concerns of corruption and bureaucratization. However, Wang has elected to throw a bone to the Reconstruction faction. Whether out of genuine idealism or simply to be contrarian, the RF is insistent that the new government be done correctly in their eyes and follow Sun's constitutional theory. With the legislation now sure to be approved, the only remaining matter is how to distribute the positions. With the list of applicants already in front of him, the president and his closest advisors decide the nominations. Okay, so go with merits of each applicant. Carefully balanced across the factions, basically to the chairman. Based upon the merits of each applicant, I could use more base war support. And we'll continue strengthening the Orthodox faction. And the American Civil War is about to begin. Ah, he suddenly died. Tragedy struck the KMT last week as one of its pivotal figures is laid to rest. Liao Zhongkai was a founding member, and at least titularly the second highest ranking member of the party state. Widely respected among the left, he has continued to nurse lasting wounds from a brutal assassination attempt in 1925. It seems that he has finally succumbed to those wounds, though thankfully lived long enough to see the party return from its exile. As his funeral concludes near Nanjing, his personal effects are not the only things being divided. Following traditions set by Dr. Sun himself, his wife He Jiangning, herself a prominent revolutionary, has taken a central executive committee seat. The position of vice chairman of the CEC, a position specifically created for him during the exile period, has gone to Song Qingling, helping preserve the balance of party power within the party. Remaining in contention, however, is the title of Premier of the Executive Yuan. The nominal head of the executive branch, it was factually created during the League War as a replacement for the old Baiyang Prime Minister. Liao hardly had any time to utilize it, however, leaving executive power effectively in the hands of the nominally weak presidency. To Wang, the job was meant as a means of personally recognizing Liao's contributions. To his rivals in the PAC, it represented a necessary counterweight to the chairman, as Liao was seen as more conciliatory. Wang is determined to avoid having to split executive prerogatives, fearing the perils of a powerless president vulnerable to political machinations. As President of the Republic, it is his right to appoint the Premier, and Chen Gongbo is the most logical candidate. A loyal protege, friend, and leader of the RCA, his candidacy is troubled by his personal radicalism and the fact that Wang needs him elsewhere. The alternative is for Wang to abolish the premiership and incorporate it into the presidency, certain to cause alarm. Whatever he decides, his choice will cast a long shadow, setting precedent for the future of presidential-premier relationships in the Congress. The first generation of the Chinese Syndicalist Party's leadership has long coalesced into the so-called Orthodox faction, a group of older intellectuals educated abroad. Consisting of many former anarchists and labor organizers, similar to France, a compromise was hammered out between the council-based Marxists, led by former anarchist turned councilist Cheng Duxoi, who has since renounced the anarchist movement, and union-based syndicalists led by Li Lisan. They were pragmatic, compromising with the KMT to form the United Front and other non-KMT leftists to form the Chinese Syndicalist Party. These critical compromises kept the spirit of syndicalism alive and well, even with the disastrous Northern Expedition and many of their revolutionary niche absorbed by the KMT. Primarily urban-based, they reasoned that the proletariat and peasant must work together to defeat imperialism, and further believed that China must industrialize first to achieve true syndicalism. In the meanwhile, they hoped to steer their sister party away from authoritarianism. The rest of nature, the syndicalist movement has unfortunately proved to be its downfall. The League of Chinese Syndicalists is effectively no more, with many having grown alienated by the power struggles that emerged from within it. Even as the CSP Orthodox faction reestablishes its leadership, there is no piecing it back together. That said, Chen and Li are determined to carry on its legacy, ensuring the stable but steady transition to China's syndicalist future. Case. The Judicial Yuan. That is the branch of the government that oversees the Supreme Court, the Supreme Administrative Court, the Disciplinary Court, and also the Ministry of Justice and Administration. Given the numerous constitutional ambiguities during the political tutelage period, with a decades-old provisional constitution that has yet to be formally replaced, there is some interest by the KMT's competing factions to have a sympathetic figure at its helm. Although in practice the CEC has the final say in constitutional affairs, the final candidate will likely set the tone for the Yuan as a whole in its formative years. Given the RCA's dominance of the government so far, it is widely expected that Wang will appoint someone from outside his clique. The leading two candidates are Guo Guangji and Wu Chaoshu. Guo Guangji is a French-educated professor of law who taught at Sun Yat-sen University in Guangzhou. Well qualified, he is also a high-ranking member of the PAC, a faction that Wang would like to keep contained. Wu Chaoshu was the first Chinese lawyer in Hong Kong, educated in the UK, and the chairman of the Judicial Committee in the 1925 government. His outspoken affiliation with the RF made him an object of mistrust, however, among socialist circles. Of course, there's always the third option. The young Gu Zhending is a scion of the RCA, educated in Sun Yat-sen University in Paris. It certainly would not be a good look for the chairman, but he survived for us. I am not ready for this. This is way too early. Oh well. Who said the revolution had to be cautious? Possibly me. Oh, I hope Feng Tian decides to go ahead and do so. They haven't even started the year of righteous effort. Yep. This might get rough. With his recent premiership solidified, Chen Gongbo has officially announced the publication of his new treatise, What Does the KMT Represent? Chen begins with an attack on Deng Yanda, Sun Fo, the Four Elders, and others for having encouraged party factionalism and thus losing the party's capacity to lead the national revolution. I might actually shorten the front line here. Don't think I can hold all that. And that for encouraging, yeah. In common reorganizationist rhetoric, he advocates for an intensive house cleaning of the party while rejecting calls for a new party or separate party. Yeah. Don't really need to talk about that, do I? There's no choices. So I think it would be fine just to leave for the time being. Interpreting the new culture movement. The Society of Art for Art's Sake, say the leftist writers, who argue that the national revolution of the Chinese Revolution is not merely a revolution against imperialism or society, but rather a revolution of culture. In the early days, the so-called new writers found themselves drawn to romanticism as opposed to naturalism, advocating art for art's sake and emphasizing the individual. Following the tragedy of the Shanghai Massacre on May 30th, leftist journalists, artists, writers began to gravitate towards the proletarian movement. Art was to be a tool in the natural dialectic Marxist progression of the social revolution. Led by artistic intellectuals such as Guo Moreau, Cheng Fangwu, and Yu Dafu, have organized themselves in an artistic circle known as the Creation Society, with other prominent socialists to write and critique Chinese society, as well as address the future proletarian revolution. They are also joined by groups such as the League of Left-Wing Writers in the legation cities, with the legation cities being a prominent hotbed of left-wing literary and cinematic activity due to the perceived capitalistic oppression of foreign imperialism. Within the KMT, more radical Marxists in the party, such as those among the RCA, have clamored for the observance of Karl Marx's birthday, May Day, and the anniversary of the Paris Commune. The PAC, however, while the clique openly supports leftist art and culture, they have nonetheless shown opposition and fear of ideologues such as Zheng Gongbo, who advocate for the necessity of a cultural revolution, citing that the social revolution and the revolution against imperialism are more important in the here and now. They have denounced Chen's suggestion for a revolution against existing cultural institutions. The national revolution always comes first, as always. Okay. There we go. Now that I've started turning the tides, done that, I can begin turning the tides against them. Letting their construction fast. Certainly the Young Guard brings a new energy to Whampoa, with the new headmaster proclaiming that this will be the start of a new modern Chinese revolutionary army. Nonetheless, there has been some notice that there are more radical ideas being published or spread routinely. Ideas linking the revolution to maximalism, Savinkov, and Sorel. Only time will tell whether or not this threat of radicalism is real. Those ideas are awfully drastic. They capitulated. Okay. I've got most of the score, so I'll be able to get most of the provinces for myself. Fengtians partly have anything. This is way sooner than I normally would do this. I wasn't expecting to complete Phase 2 in an hour and 15 minutes. About a decade ago, Chiang Kai-shek addressed his officers on the eve of the Northern Expedition. The importance of this fight is not only that it will decide the fate of the warlords, but whether or not the Chinese nation and race can restore their freedom and independence hangs in the balance. In other words, it is a struggle between the nation and the warlords, between the revolution and the counter-revolutionaries, between the three people's principles and imperialism. The KMT was knocked down then, but the fight never ended. Today, the blue sky, white sun, and holy red earth finally was raised over a changed Beijing as party members, both those that witnessed the first expedition and those that joined in the interim, and cheered on. As Wang Jingwei and other party members delivered their speeches, soldiers paraded, and experts speculated about the future. There was little doubt of the significance of the moment. Victory. Yes, victory. Over the warlords, over the counter-revolutionaries, over imperialism. Chiang and many others did not live to see the moment, but their legacy is secured. The KMT has proven itself capable of more than just words, casting down the institutions they so hated. Even if resistance continues and enemy pockets are mopped up, the nation is changing. Socialism appears more and more as a credible future for China, and the KMT no longer merely a fringe party. But threats remain. Heavy is the head that wears the crown, and the party's newfound legitimacy has drawn the attention of a host of foes both at home and abroad. Meanwhile, it fights to avoid being undone by the influx of opportunists, divisions, and new responsibilities. The people now expect them to lead, and that's often far more difficult than to overthrow. So now the second. Focus tree. Well, the Phase 3 focus tree is available now. Though, this is going to be an issue. Because I still have plenty of things I need to do, because it's the national economy and recovering from the League War. I'm also going to have to start dealing with the local warlords if I want to ensure that the Kuomintang remains under control. At least I've got more military factories to work with, so I can continue to produce more and more artillery, because I need that stuff now, and fast. I should also start looking into adjusting the template in order to use, well, not just supported, but also this. Question, can I afford this? Yes. Okay, make the changes. I'm gonna need to start producing support equipment again at some point, but right now the priority is getting toward artillery. But the National Revolutionary Government has managed to do the Northern Expedition without any further conquests after the League War, which is impressive to say the least. I can't believe I actually managed that. Especially since I wasn't training any new troops, because I wasn't expecting this to happen that quickly. But yeah. The last time I played this, I managed to get through the entire reconstruction tree, all of this, and a bit into this, before I actually managed, well, okay, so the entire reconstruction tree, this end of the political tree, because Reacher's slot, really important to get those quickly. Yeah. So all that's left is national unification by defeating the Fengtian government and the Empire of Japan. And, well, sweeping up the dregs. Which is Literally everything but the Qing government and the remains of the League, as well as, well, the Shanking Tianguo. I still haven't had time to really get all the compliance in. Not in a lot of provinces, anyway. Certain ones are getting there. At least if the managing click. It's gonna take time, but yeah. As for other world events, let's see here. Yep, Ukrainian People's Republic. Ah, okay. Radical Socialists won the election. Russian Authoritarian Republic with a firm hand. Legacy of the Whites. Yep. Estonia also joined the Moscow Accord. Latvia remains independent. Yeah, because the Baltic state has collapsed in on itself. Spanish Civil War is ongoing. It looks like Carlos Spain will end up winning. Italy's still at peace. Bulgaria. Yeah. I figure they'll do the peace deal soon. Next won the Arabian Civil War. Uh-huh. Constitutionalism. Yep. Okay. Constitutional monarchy. Uh-huh. Embrace pluralism, probably will be the case for Austria. American Civil War is ongoing. The Union State seems to be winning, but that isn't necessarily the case. The odds can easily shift depending on what happens. Pacific seems to be doing well for themselves. It's probably because the focus is elsewhere. Hawaii went syndicalist, well, radical socialist, joined the Internationale, all that. Philippines under control of the local military. Yeah. So the Federalists lost the Civil War down here, so yeah. And Hunan has joined the Federalists. Whereas the right KMT won out in Yunnan. Okay, so I don't need to deal with this anymore. Theoretically. Outside of for the various buffs that this provides, because I no longer need to do the reconstruction elements of that. But I'm gonna need factories badly, so I'm probably gonna end up focusing on down this path. Once I started working towards dealing with the local warlords. For the most part, I can't do. Guangxi might end up working with me, but I highly doubt it. Hunan's not going to work with me. The Kuomintang might. Depends on if Kunming can get to them first. Doubt. Yeah. The Maw Click, it might also be willing to work with me, but I'm not sure. Either way, it's gonna get interesting. Plus the Fengtian are liable to attack at any point. Because they could war go against me because I'm now owner of Beijing. tax retrenchment. So for right now, I'm going to be... right, mini-map. I'm going to leave my troops up here. For now. I can probably hold off any attacks from them, but still. I'd rather be careful. I'm going to need to start training more troops. Problem, I'm low on manpower because I haven't been able to take the time to actually core anything. It's going to be a little while before these provinces start to get cored. It's going to be a little longer before there's enough compliance in the entirety of the Nanjing clique's old cores to core everything. Though that will be an important fourth step. So, I have gone on long enough now. Balance of power is a bit more even. I still need to deal with so much. The legitimacy of the power still needs time to grow. It'll be a while before anything interesting happens. Well, nah. It'll be a while before I can really get into the swing of things. Before I can successfully go up against Japan. Thankfully, they're a bit busy at the moment. Hopefully, so... Right. But I've gone on long enough. I'll see you again next time. Until then.